All right, well, take it away.
Go ahead, Jacob.
All right, thank you. And so for my PhD, I was here for my postdoc in ethics, and I actually lived on Elmwood Street, just like a block from here. So, kind of funny. So who should own Mars? This is a great question that a lot of people have been asking about. And hopefully you've seen something like this in the sky. If you haven't, you're probably in the wrong spot. This is Mars. And this is what Mars looked like for most of human history. That was the best view you could ever get of Mars. Mars we knew was a planet because it moved differently than the stars. But Mars wasn't really a place you thought about going or sending spacecrafts to. This is one of the better images you could get of Mars in the pre-rocket, pre-satellite era. This is from Palomar Observatory, showing you two different wavebands. You can see clouds, you can see the polar ice caps and things like that. That's about it. So what changed? Why are we able to go to Mars now? What changed is we have nuclear weapons. It's not very happy to think about, but this was the turning point. The reason we have rocketry is because we have conflict between nation states, and we're in an era where having nuclear weapons kind of allows you to sort of dictate global politics. So I'm going to show you one plot here. I'm going to show it stepwise. We have time here on the horizontal axis. We have the number of nuclear weapons, the warheads deployed on the vertical axis. So 1946, there was about 2 nuclear warheads, both by the United States. By 1950, there's a couple hundred in the United States, and Russia has nuclear weapons. Russia launches Sputnik 1 and 2, and the United States takes notice. Found NASA a few years later, just after they launched the Explorer 1 satellite to compete with Russia. You can see the US stockpile is already close to 10,000 nuclear warheads. You only need a few to destroy all of civilization. 10,000. Yuri Gagarin's flight, the first human in space, this posed a big challenge to American rocket superiority. Remember, the rockets that can take a human into flight are the same rockets that can put a nuclear warhead from the US to Russia and vice versa. The Cuban Missile Crisis really accentuated this, where there were missiles that could hit the east coast of the US. The Nuclear Test Ban Treaty was passed shortly thereafter, which confined all nuclear weapon testing underground, so you could no longer do this in the atmosphere and cause fallout. The Outer Space Treaty we'll talk about in a little bit, but this kept nuclear weapons out of space. And you can see that the US stockpile is already above 30,000, but flattening off, and the Soviet Union is trying to catch up. We have the Apollo 11 lunar landing, which demonstrated to the Soviets not just the superiority of American lunar programs, but of American rocketry and the precision that you have to be able to land humans on the moon. The Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty followed in an attempt to curb the number of nuclear weapons growing. The fall of Saigon ended the Vietnam War, which is one of the longest running conflicts in this Cold War. The second SALT treaty came about the same time as the Soviet Union stockpile increased that of the United States. We have about 40,000 nuclear weapons held just by Russia alone by the early 80s, when you had atmospheric scientists studying the effects of nuclear winter, where if enough nuclear warheads went off, not only would you have the immediate destruction of the explosion, you would have global cooling for at least several years, which would kill all agriculture and be a serious global catastrophe. Shortly after the Russian peak in their stockpile, the Berlin Wall falls. The fall of communism corresponds to a fall in the nuclear stockpile. You can see the United States is declining. The Soviet Union collapses. We have new strategic arms limitations treaties here, and you can see that the Russian and US stockpile are starting to converge. NASA finally resumed its Mars program after the 70s. They took a hiatus, partly because these were politically motivated missions, even though science is the stated purpose of these things. India develops nuclear weapons, and indicating that the barrier for entry to be a nuclear power is decreasing. Russia, feeling the hurt of its decline in the economy, and launches the first space tourist, and he partners with ESA to launch Mars Express. And we have new attempts at reducing the number of nuclear warheads, where we've at least reached a point where there's an equilibrium between the two powers. Again, this is plenty of nuclear weapons to destroy all of the planet several times over. So why am I talking about nuclear weapons? You tell me what the difference is between these two things. We have a missile, and we have a rocket. The only difference is the thing in the top here. You decide to put people or cargo in it, or you decide to put a nuclear warhead in it. It's the same technology. And so the point I want to make, and to leave you to think about here, is what we can joke all night if you want, about what Elon Musk wants to do in space. But the reality is, a commercial space program is actually fighting the Cold War without nuclear weapons. And a government space program is fighting the Cold War without nuclear weapons. The more we can demonstrate the superiority of our rocket technology without using a nuclear weapon, the more we are actually continuing to fight a Cold War just without the nukes. So why do we have, if you don't know this, there's a drone on Mars. A fluid drone on Mars. This is incredible. This thing took a selfie of itself and the drone. So, of course, there's amazing science done for this. And if you ask, what is the state, why do we have a drone on Mars? Well, they're testing powered spaceflight on other planets, because in the future, this might be a great way to explore inaccessible parts of the planet. That's true. This is also a great way to show China that NASA has better rockets than them. And fundamentally, if you ask yourself, why does things like NASA, well, why does it unify Congress when there's so much division? It's political. It's not because they care about the science. They do care about the science, but they care about demonstrating the superiority of our weapons. So let's go to the Outer Space Treaty. What was agreed upon? This is the only treaty we have for space. Space is for everybody. This is Explorer 1, first NASA probe in space. That's Sputnik 1. So outer space is the province of all mankind. Anybody can go to space. No nation can claim territory in space. So all right, I've answered my question. Who owns space? Well, it says no one. Outer space is not subject to national appropriation, right? So when the Americans planted the flag, it was authorized by an act of Congress. The act specifically said that this is not a claim of sovereignty, it's just a symbol to celebrate American achievement. But it was not, and they were very clear so that no other nation thought that the Americans were claiming the moon. Nuclear weapons stay on Earth. This is an important point, but other weapons can come up. This came up in the trivia. So yeah, Russians were issued pistols because they would land in Siberia and had to wait a couple days for rescue. And the standard issue pistol that they carried was not effective against one time when they did encounter bears. And so this weapon was invented to take the place. It's a triple-barrel pistol, the TP-82. If you fire it in space, you may damage the spacecraft and yourself. But it has been carried in space. And you still own your stuff in space, ownership of objects. So this is where who owns space. Okay, so you can't own Mars, but if you land a probe there, it's yours. But what if you build a settlement on Mars? What if it's 20 square kilometers? Well, you own your stuff. You get to keep it. So what if you're standing on a space of Mars and nobody else, someone else wants to be there? Well, the Pauli exclusion principle, whatever you want to call it. You can't occupy the same space with two people. So you're claiming, exclusive use to a certain area, even if you don't claim sovereignty. So they weren't thinking about commercial space exploration when this Outer Space Treaty was written. This was really trying to mitigate the rising tension between the United States and Russia to keep them from owning the moon, owning space, and to keep nuclear weapons out of space. So the Outer Space Treaty was overwhelmingly successful. The light colors are the countries that agree to it. The dark colors, they signed it, but the legislative bodies did not pass it. What's important is that all the nuclear powers have support the Outer Space Treaty. The Outer Space Treaty is generally considered customary international law. So even if certain countries have not signed it, it's been in such widespread use and widely adopted that it's considered customary international law. I've included North Korea and Pakistan on here, not necessarily because they dictate global politics, but I think it just shows the fact that we live in a world where having nuclear powers, having nuclear weapons, does make you relevant, and that shows that that's what they're trying to do. But the rest of these countries actually have the ability to launch rockets into space, which is really what matters. So the Outer Space Treaty is it. That's the only successful treaty that has anything to say about ownership in space, as far as who would own Mars. There was an attempt to have another treaty, both through the UN. The Moon Agreement tried to say, well, what if space belongs to everybody? It's not just open to everybody, but it belongs to everybody. We call it the common heritage of mankind. And what if What if there was an international agency that governed that sharing, and if you made money from the resources of the moon or space, you had to distribute those resources equitably to other nations, and help increase equity in the world. Well, that was much less popular than the Outer Space Treaty, and in fact, Pakistan is the only country that's party to the Outer Space Treaty. India and France have signed it but not ratified it. And so the Moon Treaty, as far as legal scholars are considered, is a dead treaty. And one of the reasons why is because of this requirement for equitable sharing and this establishment of a new authoritative body. Those don't seem to be very popular ideas. So what examples could we apply to, what examples on Earth could apply to Mars? That's it for space treaties. That's all we have. So if we're going to Mars, we're thinking about building a settlement, and there's multiple space agencies that want to go. What could we look at? So, well, there's the law of the sea. All right, this one looks popular. What's missing here? Who's not participating here? It's not just the U.S. It's the U.S. We have Israel, Venezuela, and Turkey are all major non-participants in the law of the sea. But it's actually for one reason. It's because the codified version of the law of the sea that this is showing from the 94, I believe, had established the International Seabed Authority, a new source of international authority. Countries don't generally like to cede their sovereignty to a new higher power than them. So this was the main reason the United States and others have not signed. However, they do actually abide by all other aspects of the treaty except for recognizing the International Seabed Authority. And so what you have for using the sea, this kind of configuration, you have land where 12 nautical miles off of the land is the territorial sea. That you can defend as your own sovereign territory if you are a nation. Beyond that is the 12 nautical mile contiguous zone. You can't claim that as yours, but you can enforce your laws and you can patrol it with your military. There's a 200 nautical mile zone from land that's an exclusive economic zone. So you can't claim that as yours, but you are the only nation that can do any economic activity in that zone. That includes science. So if you're a coastal scientist and you want to do science offshore in another nation's exclusive economic zone, you have to get permission for that, and you're encouraged to invite members of that nation to collaborate. Beyond that is the high seas, and that's open to anybody. Now what's interesting about this is this was not all codified in 1994. A lot of these zones developed over hundreds and thousands of years just through local practice, through local treaties, local agreements, and the exact boundaries were fixed in 94, but much of this was recognizing customary practice. So there's this idea that you don't have to have a top-down approach to law in space. You can actually start by trying things and making small agreements and seeing what works, and things can get recognized as codified international law later. So you can think about doing something like this for Mars. You have a settlement. You can't claim sovereignty, so there's no territorial zone, but there's a contiguous zone where you can defend and enforce your laws or corporate policies or whatever you are. They have exclusive economic zone, so you could land on Mars, you could establish a settlement, you could engage in some sort of economic activity like mining, but you can't claim the whole planet. You can claim economic exclusivity to a small radius. These numbers are just made up. This is just kind of illustrative. And beyond this, the Martian frontier, where that's still open to anyone. So if you could think about doing things like this. Shared spaces like the seas provide an analogy for things we could think about on Mars. There's some interesting things, though, that happen with these exclusive economic zones. So who has the largest amount of ocean territory they control? Is France, followed shortly by the United States, right? You think of them as oceanic countries, right? But they have a lot of islands, and around the islands you get a whole 200-mile radius of an exclusive economic zone. So this is a very strategic part of geopolitics now, and this is why we have 3 branches of the Pentagon that are all devoted to water, because water is very, there's a lot of conflict that can occur in these exclusive economic zones. One example is you can see in light gray the exclusive economic zone that China is supposed to have and the one that the Philippines has. This dashed line, this 9-dashed line claim is what China actually uses, which they base this on historic use of the South China Sea. The Philippines has tried to challenge this in the International Court of Justice, and China refuses to abide by that verdict. So this, you'll see this in the news in the coming years. This is ongoing conflict, and it may not be a military conflict. It may be a shipping blockade or something like that. But I mean, you can pass a law, and China is a participant. They signed the law. The United States did not, but China is not abiding by what they're supposed to abide by according to this treaty. So another example is Antarctica. Now the U.S. interest in Antarctica, the global interest in Antarctica, started with the International Geophysical Year over 100 years ago now. And there was again the scientific reason we need to chart the poles, we need to understand Antarctica, we need to reach there and explore. But this was the last unclaimed territory on Earth, so there was clear political motivation to reach Antarctica and to claim it. So the Antarctic Treaty System, popular with the nuclear powers. You can see there's more colors here. The darker colors are the countries that have stated or reserved claims to Antarctica. So in addition to the nuclear powers, you have Australia, Argentina, and Chile. You also have Norway. So under the Antarctic Treaty System, you have all of those nations that established claims or said they reserved the rights to make a claim. The Antarctic Treaty System was then convened, led by the United States in Washington, D.C., on purpose outside of the jurisdiction of the United States. Under that treaty, all the sovereign claims were suspended. So that means they still exist, you just can't enforce it. You can't do anything. So it's this weird position we're in where Antarctica today is mostly about science. There's really no military on there, on the continent. But there are nations that have claims to sovereignty in Antarctica, and some of them, Argentina and Chile, will issue passport stamps and you go to Antarctica into their sector, just as a symbolic way of asserting their sovereignty. There was a peculiar case involving whaling in Antarctica, where you see in light gray the Australian exclusive economic zone, and dark gray, that's what Australia claims in Antarctica. Again, it's not recognized by most other countries in the world, but Australia says it's theirs, and they say they have the right to not only